In a small, picturesque town, a single moment of intolerance at a local diner would set off a series of events that no one could have predicted. The longtime owner, Martin Reed, made a devastating mistake when he refused to serve a well-loved member of the community, Jack Reynolds, a veteran who had been a part of the town's fabric for years. Jack left the diner, visibly shaken by the discrimination he faced, while Martin thought the incident was over. But he was wrong. Unbeknownst to him, his actions had drawn the attention of someone who had the power to bring change, someone determined to confront the deep-seated prejudices of the town. What followed would surprise everyone and deliver a powerful lesson on forgiveness and change. Before we jump into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt tales. As Jack Reynolds stepped out of his old truck, he sighed, feeling the familiar ache in his joints, a reminder of his years of service. The sun was warm against his weathered face as he looked up at the sign of Reed's Diner, a place he had frequented for as long as he could remember. With a small smile, he walked inside, greeted by the familiar jingle of the doorbells and the smell of freshly brewed coffee and bacon. Jack made his way to his usual spot, nodding to other patrons. But something felt different that day. The usual chatter was replaced by an uneasy silence, and Jack could feel eyes on him, making him shift in his seat. Martin Reed, the owner, emerged from the kitchen. His usual warm smile was replaced by a cold, stern expression. When Jack politely ordered his usual coffee and apple pie, Martin's response was gruff. "We're out," he said, even though Jack could see a freshly baked pie on the counter. Jack's confusion grew as Martin's voice rose, insisting they were closing early and that Jack had to leave. Hurt and shocked, Jack struggled to understand what had happened. "Have I done something wrong?" he asked quietly. But Martin's answer was sharp and cruel, revealing a prejudice that Jack had never thought he'd face in this town, especially from someone like Martin. As Jack left, his shoulders slumped. A young woman at a nearby table stood up, her voice trembling as she said, "This isn't right." But Martin's cold gaze silenced her, and she hesitated, eventually sitting back down, ashamed of her fear. Outside, Jack's mind raced, the sting of Martin's words weighing heavily on him. This was not just any diner owner. Martin had been someone Jack thought of as a friend. But as Jack drove away, little did Martin know that his moment of intolerance would set off a chain reaction that would turn the whole town upside down. That night, word of the incident spread quickly. Conversations were hushed but intense as people gathered in homes, cafes, and street corners, shocked that Martin, a seemingly friendly face, could act in such a manner. Jack's son, David Reynolds, a lawyer known for his work in advocating for veterans' rights, was in the city when he heard the news. His hand shook as he listened to what had happened. He was not just any concerned son. He was a man with the influence to make a real difference, and he was determined to use it. David returned to the town, but not with plans for a legal battle. Instead, he had something else in mind, a way to confront the biases that had been exposed and to spark a change that would last. The next day, he approached Martin at the diner, who, upon seeing David, felt a chill of realization. Martin tried to stand by his actions, insisting he had the right to run his business as he saw fit. But David's response was calm yet firm. "What you did wasn't just wrong, it was illegal, and I intend to make sure there are consequences," he said. But David wasn't looking to destroy Martin. He was looking to change him. Over the next few weeks, word spread that someone was looking to buy the diner. Martin found out when a formal letter arrived, offering a generous sum, along with a note that suggested the offer would be withdrawn if Martin did not agree to leave immediately. Confused, but realizing he might not have a choice, Martin eventually decided to sell. What he didn't know was that the buyer was none other than Jack Reynolds. In the weeks that followed, the diner was transformed, and the community watched in awe as it reopened with a new name, Unity Cafe. The walls were adorned with photos and stories of local heroes, including veterans from different backgrounds, as a tribute to their shared sacrifices. The menu was updated, and the diner started hosting community events focused on understanding and acceptance. During the grand reopening, Jack stood outside, welcoming everyone. Inside, there was one final surprise. Martin, the man who had once refused to serve Jack, now stood in the kitchen, wearing a new uniform. He stepped out nervously, his voice shaking as he addressed the crowd. "I know that many of you are surprised to see me here," he began. "And you have every right to be. What I did was wrong, and it took a lot for me to realize just how wrong. But Jack and David have given me a second chance, and I intend to prove that I am worthy of it." Slowly, applause filled the room. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. And as the weeks went by, Martin worked alongside his new team, listening, learning, and changing. The once divided diner became a hub of unity, and Jack's vision for the place began to take shape. Stories were shared, walls were broken down, and understanding grew, one meal at a time. Jack's son, David, continued to support the initiative, helping to expand its mission. Soon, other towns heard about the transformation, and people began traveling to the Unity Cafe, not just for the food, but for the sense of community it had created. They wanted to see how one small town had turned an ugly incident into a movement of change, and many left inspired to bring the same spirit back to their own communities. As Jack watched people from all walks of life share meals and conversations, he felt a quiet pride. The cafe was a beacon of hope, showing that change was possible, and that sometimes a little understanding could go a long way. It was a lesson the town would never forget, and one that would continue to resonate far beyond its borders. What would you have done if you were in Jack's position? Could you have found the strength to forgive and turn a painful experience into a positive change? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories. In a small, tight-knit town nestled amid rolling hills, a moment of quiet prejudice at a local diner would ignite a ripple of change that no one could have anticipated. Martin Reed, the longtime owner of the diner, made a choice that would alter the course of his life and the lives of everyone around him. When he refused service to a local veteran, Jack Reynolds, a man respected by the community, he thought it was just a simple decision, one rooted in long-standing beliefs. Jack, hurt and confused, left the diner quietly. For Martin, the matter was settled, but little did he know that single act would reverberate far beyond the four walls of his establishment, drawing attention to the hidden prejudices still lingering within their town. What followed was a story of confrontation, resilience, and an unyielding fight for change that would surprise everyone, teaching powerful lessons on forgiveness, redemption, and the courage to change. Before we dive into this moving tale, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you find inspiration in this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt content. Jack Reynolds was a man who had known many battles. As he stepped out of his old, reliable truck, he felt the familiar creak of his joints, a stark reminder of the years he had spent in service to his country. The sun was warm on his weathered-lined face as he glanced up at the sign of Reed's Diner, its paint faded by years of sun and rain. He had been coming to this diner for years, not just for the coffee or the apple pie, but for the sense of belonging it offered, a place where he was greeted by familiar faces and friendly nods. Jack's lips curled into a gentle smile, and for a moment, he felt the peace that comes with routine. As he pushed open the diner door, the familiar jingle of bells echoed softly, welcoming him like an old friend. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, making his mouth water. Jack moved towards his usual spot at the counter, nodding politely to the other patrons, a mix of old acquaintances and new faces. But there was something off today. The usual hum of conversation was missing, replaced by an uncomfortable, heavy silence. Jack could feel eyes on him, watching, judging. He shifted in his seat, trying to brush off the feeling, attributing it to the nerves of an old soldier who had seen too much. Then, Martin Reed emerged from the kitchen. Martin had always been a fixture at the diner, his broad smile a staple for anyone who walked through the door. But today, his face was set in a hard, unwelcoming line. His eyes, usually warm, were cold and distant, and they bore into Jack with an intensity that made the old veteran's heart sink. Jack hesitated, but managed a kind smile, trying to bridge the gap that seemed to have formed overnight. "Morning, Martin. I'll have the usual. A cup of coffee and a slice of your apple pie." Martin's jaw clenched, and his knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the counter. "We're out," he said curtly, his tone gruff and unfriendly. Jack's brow furrowed in confusion. He could see a freshly baked apple pie sitting on the counter, just a few feet away. "But Martin, I can see it right there," Jack said, his voice gentle, as if hoping to remind Martin of the years of camaraderie they had shared. "I said we're out," Martin snapped, his voice rising sharply, causing several patrons to jump. "In fact, we're closing early today. You'll have to leave." The words felt like a punch, knocking the breath out of Jack. He sat there, frozen, struggling to process what was happening. In all his years coming to Reed's diner, he had never been treated this way. He glanced around, hoping to find some explanation in the eyes of the other customers, but all he saw was discomfort. Some looked away, unable to meet his gaze, while others watched the scene unfold, a mix of shock and morbid curiosity on their faces. Slowly, Jack stood up, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "Martin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "have I done something to offend you?" Martin's face twisted into an ugly sneer, and for a moment, Jack barely recognized the man he had considered a friend. "You've done plenty just by walking in here," Martin said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I don't serve your kind in my establishment. Now get out before I have to call the authorities." The words hit Jack like a physical blow, and he stumbled back, his eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. For a moment, he was transported back to a time when such treatment was all too common, a time he had fought against, a past he thought was long gone. But this was different. This was Martin, someone he thought he knew, someone who had welcomed him countless times before. As Jack turned to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat. A young woman at a nearby table stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear and strong. "This isn't right," she said, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "You can't treat him like this." Martin rounded on her, his face flushed with anger. "This is my diner, and I'll run it how I see fit. If you don't like it, you can leave too." The young woman hesitated, torn between her desire to stand up for what was right and her fear of confrontation. In the end, she sat back down, her eyes filled with shame as she watched Jack shuffle out of the diner. As the door closed behind him, the diner erupted into a flurry of whispers. Some patrons hurriedly paid their bills and left, unwilling to support such blatant discrimination. Others stayed, either agreeing with Martin's actions or too shocked to move. Little did Martin know, his act of prejudice would set in motion a series of events that would shake the very foundations of their small town. If only he had known who Jack Reynolds really was, and the powerful connections he had, he might have thought twice about his actions. But as it stood, Martin Reed had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and the consequences were about to come crashing down on him like a tidal wave. As Jack slowly made his way back to his truck, his mind was reeling from what had just transpired. The warm sunlight that had felt so comforting earlier now seemed to mock him, highlighting the stark reality of the prejudice he had just faced. He climbed into his vehicle, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. For a long moment, he sat there, staring blankly ahead, the hurt and humiliation washing over him in waves, threatening to drown him in despair. But then, almost imperceptibly, something changed in his demeanor. His jaw set in determination, and a fire kindled in his eyes. Jack Reynolds was many things: a veteran, a father, a respected member of the community. But he was not a man to take injustice lying down. As he started the engine, Jack's mind was already working, formulating a plan. He may have been kicked out of Reed's diner, but this was far from over. Little did Martin Reed know, but his actions that day would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything in their sleepy little town. Meanwhile, back at the diner, Martin Reed was already feeling the immediate backlash of his actions. Several regular customers had walked out, some shooting him disapproving glares as they left. But Martin stood his ground, his face set in a stubborn scowl. He had done what he thought was right, what he believed his father would have wanted. So why did he feel this gnawing sense of unease in the pit of his stomach? As the day wore on, word of what had happened at Reed's diner spread through the town like wildfire. People gathered in small groups on street corners and in front yards, their voices hushed as they discussed the shocking incident. Jack Reynolds was a well-known and respected figure in the community. Many couldn't believe that Martin, who had always seemed so friendly, could harbor such deep-seated prejudice. But there was one person in particular who, when he heard the news, felt a rage unlike anything he had ever experienced before. David Reynolds, Jack's son, was sitting in his office in the city when he received the call from a family friend back home. As he listened to the account of what had happened to his father, David's grip on his phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. David was not just any concerned son. He was a lawyer who had spent his career fighting for justice, particularly for veterans like his father. And now, his own father had been subjected to such blatant discrimination. The irony was not lost on him, and it only fueled his determination to right this wrong. As he ended the call, David sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He could use his position, his influence, to bring the full force of the law down on Martin Reed. He could make an example of him, show the world that such behavior would not be tolerated. But as tempting as that was, David knew that such actions often only served to deepen divides and breed more resentment. No, this situation called for a different approach. David leaned forward, picking up his phone again. He had some calls to make, some favors to call in. Martin Reed had no idea what was coming his way, but David was determined to teach him a lesson he would never forget. In the weeks that followed, the town was abuzz with speculation. Reed's diner remained open, but the usual steady stream of customers had dwindled to a trickle. Martin couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, something that he wasn't prepared for. And he was right. One morning, as he was unlocking the front door, he found a thick envelope slipped under it. Inside was a formal offer to buy his diner for a price that was almost too good to refuse. The offer was anonymous, made through a law firm he didn't recognize. At the bottom of the letter was a note. This offer is time-sensitive and contingent upon your immediate departure from the premises and agreement not to open another business in the area. Martin's mind reeled. Who would make such an offer and why now? As much as he hated to admit it, the diner had been struggling for years, and the thought of selling had crossed his mind more than once. But he had always pushed it away, clinging to the legacy his father had left him. Yet, faced with the potential fallout from his confrontation with Jack Reynolds and his son, the offer seemed like a lifeline, a way out of the mess he had created. But something about it felt off. The timing was too convenient, the conditions too specific. As Martin stood there, lost in thought, the bell above the door jingled. The diner would soon undergo a transformation, one that would turn it from a symbol of division into a beacon of hope. But it wasn't going to happen without resistance, pain, and the courage to confront deep-seated beliefs. What unfolded in the weeks ahead would be a testament to the power of forgiveness and the enduring strength of a community willing to face its past to build a better future. If you were in Jack's position, could you have found the strength to forgive? What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that inspire and uplift. As the story goes, what started as a simple act of discrimination at Reed's diner quickly became a hot topic in town. News of Jack's refusal to serve Martin spread, not only causing gossip in the community, but also angering many. Even regulars began to hesitate, many choosing not to return. Martin tried to appear calm, convincing himself that he was simply following the beliefs he had been taught since childhood, that this was how he should conduct his business. But inside, he couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. David Reynolds, Jack's son, had returned to town. He was not simply a concerned son, but an influential attorney who had spent his career fighting for veterans' rights. When David learned that his father had been wrongly treated because of the color of his skin, he felt a wave of anger and injustice. But David did not come to Reed's Diner to confront Martin, as many people thought. He had another plan, one that he believed would create real change. Early one morning, David walked into the restaurant. Martin stood behind the counter, his eyes avoiding his. David didn't beat around the bush, but went straight to Martin and gently asked to speak privately. Left with no choice, Martin reluctantly agreed. Sitting across from each other in the small room behind the kitchen, the atmosphere between the two was tense, heavy, as if waiting to explode. "Martin," David began, his voice low but firm, "your actions were not only wrong, they were illegal. You have hurt not only my father, but this entire community. But I am not here to threaten or make you pay in the traditional sense. I want to help you understand that what you have done can be fixed, if you truly want to change." Martin was about to respond, but when he saw David's determined gaze, he knew that this was more than just a conversation. David had not come to condemn, he had come to offer an opportunity. "I have received an offer to buy your place," David continued, placing the paper on the table. "It is very generous and will certainly help you escape your current troubles. But the important thing is that we will make this place a new space, a place where everyone is welcome, regardless of color, creed, or background." Martin looked at the paper, then at David. He sensed the intensity and kindness in his voice. "What are you trying to do?" Martin asked, his voice hoarse, almost choking. David took a deep breath, placing his hands gently on the table. "We want to buy this diner and turn it into a symbol of unity. We'll change the name, change the whole atmosphere. It won't be a place where discrimination is tolerated, but a place where people, especially veterans, can come to find comfort, support, and empathy. But most importantly, Martin, we want you to join us." Martin couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Join," he exclaimed. "You want me to join after all I've done?" David nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "Yes, I know this may sound strange, but I believe in change. Everyone can learn and grow. If you truly recognize your mistakes, then this is your chance to start over, to be a part of the change you once prevented." A silence fell over the small room. Martin didn't know what to say. He felt a tightness in his heart, a mixture of shame and regret. But looking into David's eyes, he realized that this was not a threat, but an invitation, a forgiveness. After a long moment, he finally nodded. "I don't know if I deserve this chance," he said, his voice choking. "But if I can make it right, I'm willing to try." A few weeks later, Reed's Diner closed for renovations. News spread quickly around town. People were curious about what was going on and why it had to close so suddenly. One Saturday morning, the doors reopened. This time, with a completely new name, Unity Cafe. The restaurant has been redesigned from the inside out. Once bare walls are now decorated with photos and stories of veterans from all backgrounds, honoring their service and sacrifice. Meals are no longer just about food, but about stories, about encounters that connect seemingly strangers. On weekend evenings, the restaurant becomes a place to hold discussions about integration and understanding, inviting people from all over to share and listen. On the day of the reopening, Jack stood at the door, greeting everyone with a warm smile. Inside, Martin was found, no longer the proud owner of Reed's Diner, but a chef behind the scenes, working with the new staff. When he stepped forward to speak, his voice was shaky but clear. "I know I'm the last person you want to see here. I made a big mistake, and I can't expect forgiveness. But Jack and David gave me the chance to make it right, to learn, and I hope you'll give me that chance." The applause was loud, but sincere. It was not complete forgiveness, but recognition of a person trying to change, facing the past and daring to step into the future. Unity Cafe is more than just a place to eat. It is a symbol of unity and hope, a place where people from all backgrounds can come together and share their stories. David and Jack have turned pain into strength, turned hate into love, and most importantly, they have turned a small town into an example of change, forgiveness, and kindness for thousands across the country. If you were there at Unity Cafe that day, you could have felt it. You could have seen Jack and Martin, two men, two generations, once on opposite sides of the divide, now laughing and talking and serving their customers. And that was the miracle of forgiveness, a miracle that anyone can create if they just have a little courage and kindness. So if you were Jack, would you be strong enough to forgive and turn your pain into strength? Share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more touching stories like this.